The Purple Tinted Window by Steve Duffy. This facility, this treacherous gift, unwanted, unreturnable. When was she first aware of it? As far back as she could remember, most memorably, most completely, on the day her father died, when she was still a little girl. She knew when he left the house that morning that he wouldn't ever come home. She wanted to tell him, to try to explain to him what would happen, or perhaps have him explain to her how she could possibly know such an extraordinary thing, what it might mean, how she should feel. But he seemed so impatient that morning. He was always so impatient. He dismissed her abruptly and hurried out to catch his bus, slamming the door on his family for the very last time. She knew it for an absolute fact, standing in the hallway, feeling a numbness that seemed a poor substitute for grief. She tried to take it in. Unsure what to do with her terrible information, she wandered into the kitchen and confided in her mother, who only got upset and scolded her. Off she went to school, where she told everybody in class that her daddy was going to die that day in an accident at work. There would be scaffolding giving way and collapsing like jackstraws, the blaring of ambulance sirens, a star splash of blood to be mopped from newly laid concrete. Did anybody believe her? Of course not. It only confirmed the general opinion of her as a strange little girl, a maverick, best left to her own devices. When she got back home, her mother was sitting at the table with the telephone in her hand. The police had already hung up, and the dead connection was buzzing loudly in the suddenly silent room. "Momya, what's happened?" she asked, knowing already, of course. Her mother looked at her in a way impossible to describe. Mutely she turned and ran upstairs. In her room she sat, quietly on the edge of the bed, twisting the hair of her doll into a tight knot. If the foreknowledge brought her no comfort, at least it spared her the shock. Like the cheating reader who's already glanced at the last page of the mystery to find out who done it, and yet still feels obliged to read the whole thing through, mechanically, without real engagement, she applied herself to the seemly portrayal of sorrow. Now, grown up, she still hears things in the silence, feels presences in empty rooms, catches glimpses in the corner of her eye of shifting manifestations, destinies unraveling, fragments of dreams filtered through daylight, indefinite threats left hanging in the air. She's learned to ignore them, by and large, in the same way that she never looks at horoscopes or visits fortune-tellers, nor even looks at herself in the mirror for longer than is absolutely necessary. Her family, without a chief provider since her father's death, were more than willing to make the tough decisions. It was made clear to her that this circumstance was, in some way, her responsibility, that it was up to her to make reparations to her mother, to her brothers and sisters, to the memory of her father even. So one day, several months ago, she travelled by bus to Cebu City and registered with the Filipina Dream Girl Bridal Agency, a shabby suite of rooms above a supermarket. Her fate thus positioned out of her hands, she returned home to her village and waited for the summons to arrive. One morning, checking her inbox, she was immediately aware of presences, dim and elusive in the corners of the room. Determinedly she looked straight ahead and waited for the mail to load, while in the half-light of pre-dawn vague shapes formed and fell apart and reformed in her vicinity. Before she clicked on the new email, she knew what it would contain. Lying within the words, like the life force wound tightly inside the bud, like the rogue protein in the pre-cancerous cell, would be the germs of when and where, of how and who. The why she never even thought to consider. His name was Lachlan Ogilvy, a barbaric clot of sound that made no sense to her when she spoke it aloud. But the whispers ran around the room in a cockroach scuttle, and she understood that through this man her destiny would finally be revealed. He was from Scotland, the email said, a worker on oil rigs, and he would be arriving in Cebu City within the month. An appointment had been made on her behalf. She was instructed to dress alluringly, yet within the boundaries of decency, and to defer to the judgment of the agency representative in all things. Should she prove satisfactory, the approved sum of money would be paid into her nominated account, her mother's, since her own had already been closed out in anticipation. It would be best if she were to say her goodbyes before departing for the city. She understood this last as a formal and binding severing of connections, her ultimate casting adrift. "Say goodbye," the whispers bid her as she sat back from the keyboard, eyes closed in resignation. "Say goodbye to all you know. Say goodbye to everything." And now, having said her farewells to all that's been and will now longer be her world, she sits in the departure lounge of Edinburgh Airport, waiting for her flight to be called. Halfway around the world from her small town in the Philippines, her new husband, slumped, drunk and snoring at her side, she is more definitively alone than she has ever been. Not one word of her own language to be heard, no gesture or kind look, no homely face from which to take the most basic shred of comfort. Helplessly, her hands flutter to her cold, pale cheeks. With an effort, she refolds them in her lap. A small boy breaks loose from his parents' grasp and scampers past her, roaring his freedom to the echoes. In need of distraction, she turns to watch him run towards the wall of glass at the back of the lounge. Will he break through and launch himself into boundless space, soar above the aeroplanes on the tarmac, and disappear into some truer, more absolute firmament? She knows he won't. And in an instant he's scooped up and scolded, returns squirming and wriggling to safety and protection. Her gaze follows the family as they take seats with a view out over the runways, then wanders back across the concourse. Over by their departure gate, Gate 7, what is that? What's there? The bright light from outside blinds her as she squints to see. She can make out only silhouettes, drawn out and featureless, unnaturally thin. Like everyone, they seem to be waiting. One, the nearest, moves closer for a second, and she gasps with recognition, as if she was 7 again, and he was there in the hallway, towering over her, a tall, impatient man forever saying goodbye. She whispers it, so soft, so uncertain. "Amma?" Beside her, her husband stirs. "What? What's the matter?" So angry. Always. "Nothing." Because it already will be nothing. She knows these figures, how they come and go, how they cannot be willed into vision, not even the shadow of a loved one long lost. She redirects her gaze to the scuffed tiles at her feet, partly from ingrained deference, partly because she doesn't wish to have to explain what it is she's seen, partly because she can hardly bear to look at the man to whom she's married. "Why'd you have to wake me up then?" Irritably, he struggles up from his plush seat, stretches with a barely suppressed belch. "I need the lavvy anyway." He tugs at the waistband of his trousers, and she tries her best not to recoil from the stink, like rancid bacon, ingrained within the folds and rolls of his flab. "I'm sorry," she begins, a reflex already, but he's already stumping across the concourse towards the washrooms. I'm sorry. She's forever saying it. She has a suspicion that soon it will become the only thing she ever says. Just how sorry will she end up being, though? And for how long? She looks up again towards the departure gate, wondering if this is the revelation so long postponed. The thin ones are still there, if she squints, just barely, already dissolving in the watery brilliance of sunshine after showers. She gets to her feet uncertainly, wanting in that instant to follow them into the light, the jagged, fractured light. 1 step, 2 steps, then the hand on her shoulder. "What are you bloody playing at? Christ's sake. You left the luggage on the floor there. Won't some thieving bastard have a way with it?" Again she apologizes, tries to explain that she was looking to see their flight on the big board. But the tannoy cuts across her, calling all passengers for flight BE 697 to Sombra, boarding now at gate 7. "Look, that's us. Just get the stuff there, will you?" he tells her, scowling as if the announcement has somehow won him an argument, caught her in a falsehood. Wordlessly she obeys. By the time they reach the boarding gate, the thin figures have resolved themselves into a handful of bystanders. Just passengers in transit, killing time between flights. They watch, barely curious, as the troglodyte Scotsman and his bird-like Filipina disappear through the gate. Hurrying after him, out towards the waiting twin-engine turboprop, she squints against the glare of sunlight off the rain puddles. Away off across the runways, a passenger jet is peeling itself off the tarmac. She hears its engines throttled up to the maximum and thinks to herself how they sound like screams muffled by a fist crammed in the mouth. Like the screams inside her own head. Over by the boarding stairs of the -8, her husband is calling her. By the time it filters through, he's already losing his patience, and she realizes she's come to a halt on the wet concrete of the apron, standing and staring while the world goes on around her, lost in the space opened up between things. Humbly she comes to him and hurries up the steps. "You're in a bloody dream world, so you are," he grunts, dragging her inside the tiny plane. Before her eyes have adjusted to the dim interior, she's trapped in a window seat, her fuming husband wedged between her and the aisle. Her absent-mindedness, on the apron, in the departure lounge, elsewhere in the course of the day's long journey now nearing its final stage, has pushed him over into scarcely concealed ill temper. When she tries to say something to break the tension, he scowls and hushes her. In her distress, she forgets to do up her safety belt. When the flight attendant points this out, her husband bats her trembling hands out of the way and roughly buckles her in. She smells him up close, and cannot help but shudder as she thinks back through the last few nights of her new life. He senses her flinch and grabs her arm just a little too hard for just a little too long. Their eyes meet. Already it's been established between them that his glare will, in itself, go a long way towards subduing her, whatever else is said, whatever else is done. She's the first to look away, and perhaps he takes it as another little victory, because soon afterwards he subsides once more into dozing, leaving her to watch through the window as the plane taxis over to the runway. Where jets soar unstoppably, a prop-engine plane can only grapple its way aloft. As the -8 labours into the low November murk above the Firth of Forth, she feels the beginnings of panic. Her arms are folded tightly across her chest, her head at a protectively submissive angle, eyes fixed on the slate-grey water below. Her fingers clutch and worry at her too flimsy clothes. These unfriendly latitudes are tightening their grip on her thin bones. Even in the aeroplane she's aware of an enduring chill. Then the plane is up in the clouds and everything is blotted out. She can't bear to look through the window anymore. It reminds her too much of the swirl and blur through which the presences appear, those formless, shapeless things known to her since infancy. She pulls down the plastic shutter, edges away from the slumbering bulk of her husband that hems her in. The cabin is filled with the ambient murmur of conversation, this weird, clotted accent of her new home, whispers and murmurs that she can hardly make sense of. Listening, without really meaning to, she's taken aback to hear her own name, spoken as a countryman would speak it, not slurred and stumbled over after the manner of her husband. Straining to hear, twisting in her seat, she picks up another word or two in her own language. Walang Makatakas, she hears, and Ang Ion Kamatayan. The thrill of hearing her own language all but blots out the meaning of what's being said. She tries to catch a glimpse of the speakers, but the seat backs are too high. For a second she considers getting up, introducing herself perhaps, but she knows what her husband would say, and do besides. Also, the longer she listens, the harder it is to hear the voice, the less sure she is it's even speaking Filipino. The whispering becomes mixed in with the engine drone and the low background chatter, and try as she might the sense of it is lost, until suddenly, almost against her ear it seems, the voice, very clear now, rapid and precise, cuts through one last time. It is, she now realizes, the voice of her father, and he's telling her what will happen at the very moment of her death. And precisely at that moment her husband comes awake with a start and a curse, and the rest of the sentence is lost. Wriggling free of his reflexive grip, she peers back through the gap between seats. In the row behind, an old man is sleeping, plastic denture askew in his slack mouth. Beside him sits a bristling ginger Scotsman, a younger, more amiable version of her husband. Neither could have spoken to her, in her own tongue, still less in her father's voice. Did that voice really come from inside, then? Has she carried it inside her, like her memories of the past, like her secret knowledge of the future? Would that mean she's always known what her father was about to tell her, the circumstances of her own death? Has she carried within her the story of her own dissolution all this time? A crawling panic climbs up inside her stomach to lodge in a tight, indigestible ball at the back of her throat. She bites down hard on her tongue to stop it from becoming a sound, a thin rising wail of anguish and fear. Only when she tastes blood does she stop, and only then do the whispers diminish. The last stage of her long journey is the shortest of all that have brought her round the world, and yet long before it's over she's praying to whatever gods might represent the displaced and forsaken that it might not end, that she might be delivered against all odds through endless cloud to some inconceivable realm beyond, some dreamland in the air, a place where she need not touch the ground, where gravity will not drag her down to the common fate, or to a stranger, lonelier destiny that is hers and hers alone. Through the window there is only shifting grey cloud, featureless, without focus, like sleep without the comfort of a dream, like what's left when the dreamer gets to the end of all her dreaming. When all of a sudden the sea appears, mere feet below it seems, it nearly makes her scream. The plane is dropping far too fast from far too low already, and for a second she thinks it must surely ditch in the freezing northern sea, which would be an answer of another sort. At the last possible moment, it seems, bright runway lights cut through the gloom, and then, with a squeal of rubber and a lurch of breaking, they are landed, before she could so much as frame a prayer. Disembarking, she's trembling so much that her husband has to grab her by the arm, set her upright, and half drag, half carry her over to the low concrete buildings at the end of the strip, towards the lighted windows, brave and bright against the redeveloping fog. He fumbles in her jacket pocket, thrusts her passport into her shaking hand, hisses, "Don't you dare show me up," as they approach the customs desk. The officials greet them neutrally, their faces professional and unreadable. They exchange glances for a moment, and wordlessly point the way through to the arrivals lounge. She barely sees a thing, registers only a blur of branded hospitality and shabby convenience as her husband propels her along. She sees shapes through the hot smear of her sudden tears, and thinks she recognizes them from earlier, back in Edinburgh, all the way back to her old life, perhaps. Shadows, really, shades that slip into insubstantiality, that can't lift an arm to help her as she's frog-marched through the concourse. And then the two of them, the only real things on this isle of frozen wraiths, are barging through a glassed-in foyer to the raw and raining outdoors once more. It's near dusk. There's a strip of sandy tarmacadam, a row of cars parked up against low wind-blown dunes, and amongst them a large, black van with tinted windows. She knows it will be his. Leaning against the shabby paintwork of the van, she tries to catch her breath, wipe the tears from her eyes. Her husband jerks the side door open with a rumble and a clang. "Get in," he tells her, as he might bring a whipped dog to heel. And her foot is on the step, her head and shoulders all but inside the vehicle, when she looks up and sees, through the purple-tinted window, the thing her father had begun to tell her on the plane. There through the window is finally revealed to her the crucial thing, the last thing of all, the spectacle of her own death. The vision hangs in its own focal plane somewhere beyond the glass, as if the window were a camera lens trained on her dissolution. And in this aperture through which the future has somehow slipped, there lies an interlinked chain of causes and effects, an inexorable progression from relative safety to absolute despair, a sequence of blows and insults, each one harder and more wounding than the last, each one striking more nearly home. But at the end she sees herself succumbing, sinking beneath the great empurpled fists of her husband into that realm of wraiths and shadows on whose borderland she's lived all her life, down through the levels to that long-dreaded emptiness. Beyond all she's known, an immensity of nothing, a loneliness that makes her current predicament seem almost enviable. All this and more she sees through the purple-tinted window. The immediacy, the suddenness of it is complete and undiminished. It's all there in an instant, the before and the after, the urgent, brutal truth of her death instant, bright like a camera flash. There she is, trapped at last, in a small room of a small dark house that stands above a cold dark bay. There she lies, all caught up in death after a lifetime spent at a dimly awestruck distance. There's her husband kneeling beside her, blubbering and howling in all his dreadful nakedness, roaring her name over and over, as if willing her back to life, to submit once more to his blows, to atone for more of her imaginary sins, to justify his wretched manhood one last time. But she will not wake, she will not move, not this time. She will lie bruised and broken in a halo of her clotting blood till her husband drags her out to the deep notch of the high cliff and bundles her body into the scum-capped sea, till he clears the stain of her murder away with cloths and brushes and his own selfish tears. All caught in the purple-tinted window. And now is the moment for her to run. Now she sees it all, exactly the way it'll happen. What will become of her if she gets into the van and lets him carry her away? Now or never. But before she can even begin to know what to do, how to react, her husband, Lachlan Ogilvy, her brutish, ridiculous lord and master, pushes her inside, leans into her hard from behind so her knees buckle, and she falls forward onto the vinyl-upholstered bench seat. There, on her hands and knees, shocked beyond sobs or remonstrations, she looks up once more, and through the van windows sees nothing. What more is there to see? With a curse and a clang, her husband slams the door shut, stumps round to the driver's side, gets in, and starts the engine. It's a short drive from the airport to their destination, the dark little house by the edge of the cliffs, the place that fate has prepared for her. Before the van has travelled more than 100 yards, it's lost inside the North Atlantic rain, the bone-white face at the purple window swallowed up into oblivion.